Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel, Lockdown Literary Club. This is going to be my first video of 2021. This video is going to be the list of the best books published in 2020. With a little caveat, I haven't read all the books published in 2020, clearly. I actually have like 10 to 15 books in my list that were published in 2020 that I still haven't gotten to yet. But if I wait till I have read them and then do this video, it's probably never going to happen because sometimes books are left in your TBR forever. And another caveat here is that maybe one or two of these books are on like Booker Prize list or Pulitzer Prize list. Because as great as those books are, they're very dense and hard to read, and not all of us like to read them all the time. I like to dabble in all genres, but I can't read consecutively all the books nominated for a Booker Prize or a Pulitzer Prize because they get dark. Some of them you really need to take your time reading and analyzing and just like letting it sit with you. So this is all genres, all over the place, and definitely subjective because it's based on what I've read personally. So, okay, let's get to this. I've divided this into all the genres and subgenres. So it's nonfiction, fiction, and then poetry, romance, and all of that. And I'm not going to rate these books. I'm just going to give you a brief review and like what I think of it. That's it. Part of the reason I'm not telling you is because I don't remember what I rated some of these books. So. Should we start with fiction or nonfiction? Let's start with the biographies and work our way into more miscellaneous categories. Okay, so this was a hard one to get through. This is A Promised Land by Barack Obama, who was the 44th president of the United States. He was the president of the United States for 2 terms, that's 8 years. And this book is just the lead up to the election and his first term as the president. He does give you a brief introduction. I think he gets through his first few years growing up and like where his education, his ideology, his lineage, all of that comes from in the first few chapters. And then he just gets very deep into his presidency. Like he tells you the names of not just cabinet members, but people who worked under them, what was the selection process, how did he go about picking them. It's just a lot of information that most people don't really need. Obama is notorious for like speaking in very long, lengthy monologues, so this is not surprising in any way, but I think it can be more concise, and it did feel a little defensive to me at times. And there are strains of American exceptionalism in here, which after everything still really, it's problematic. This is what really leads to nationalistic pride. It's good to have pride in your nation and your country, but to the point of you think it's better than anywhere else, that's where we run into problems. I didn't appreciate that, but like he's still very well educated, very thoughtful. There were some moments in it that genuinely made me tear up, and it was a good read. But it's a long book. It's going to be hard to get through. So unless you're very interested in the subject matter, I don't think this applies to you. However, I think everyone should be more politically active and know what's going on around them. If you're American, you should read this because he does break down how a government functions, how bipartisanship is falling apart. All of that is necessary for you guys to understand. Even if you're not American, it's good to know how governments function and what goes into the functioning of from the Indian perspective, a more well-functioning government system than us. So check it out. It might even look like fantasy for you. This is Untamed by Glennon Doyle. This was actually a great book. I was genuinely surprised by this. I haven't read her previous books, but I don't know if she was conservative, but she was a devout Christian, and she was married and had kids. I think that's what her books were about, like living with faith and making relationships work. And then she divorced her husband, came out as a lesbian, married. I don't know if she's married, but she's partnered with her lover and is raising her kids with her lesbian partner. So this is all of that. This book just like breaks down that process around like what coming out felt like at her age with kids and how to reconcile her faith with her belief systems. So because her previous 2 books were about marriage and making it work through difficult times and all of that, because she did that in a very public platform by releasing books and telling people how to like be good at relationships, this might have been hard for her to do, but she faced up to it, and it's really good. I really enjoyed this book. So I would recommend it, and it just gave me hope for like someone to come from such a conservative background, and despite other people's judgment, to like claim her happiness and claim a life instead of like being scared of the consequences and spending the rest of her life, pretending to be someone else. So it was cool. Just gave me hope. I did a review of this book a long time ago, The Lone Empress by Vaasanthi. This is the story of Jayalalitha, who's a politician from Tamil Nadu in India. And it's a really, really bad book, so don't even bother reading it. I'm not going to waste any more time talking about it. Weather by Jenny Offill. Even this I've talked about in another video. The narrative style of this book is very loose. It's all over the place. It's just like jottings of thoughts and events that are happening. It doesn't have a very clear narrative style, so that might be very hard for some people to read. And it's set in 2016, which is a very tumultuous year because politically a lot of governments were changing in the United States. Trump got elected. I think there were a lot of storms and hurricanes that were happening. And it was just a very tough year for people to get through. So it's that. It's a decent book, but I don't think it's for everyone. So the next book I have is Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby. I actually had high expectations for this book because it's praised by a lot of the authors I like. She's a feminist. She identifies as queer or LGBTQ+, and that's my niche. So I was very surprised when I didn't like it. Something about the writing style didn't work for me. But it might for you. I think sometimes humor is a very subjective thing. This is supposed to be humor and similar to what David Sedaris does or similar to Roxane Gay's Hunger. However, it did not work for me because I cringed more than I laughed. But again, humor is subjective, so you might like it. I don't know, but I didn't like it. It's a pretty book though. Next, it's highlighted. Okay, this is The Office, the untold story of the greatest sitcom of the 2000s by Andy Greene. So this book is just like a compilation of interviews of most of the characters and the set and the crew, the production team, everyone involved in The Office, the TV show. The American version, not the British version, though Ricky Gervais, who's the actor and the producer of the British version and produced the American version, is also in here. So some of that team is pulled in to interview, but this is focused on the American version of The Office, just so we're clear. And it's really good. If you love the TV show The Office, then you would love this book. Generally, if you're into TV shows also, you should read this book because it also explores like what went into casting the show and finding the perfect chemistry, how they had to tweak and readjust because it was an adaptation of a previously successful show. So if you're anyway interested in movies or TV shows, this might be really fun for you to read. So like my favorite part of it is it picked a few episodes, key episodes throughout the show, and it really broke them down. And it's some of my favorite episodes made it into the book. So it was just so great to get a behind the scenes peek at my favorite episodes. So. And my favorite characters are back to talk about it. And at the end, they mentioned they are probably getting a reunion special or something. They're all saying we're up for it. And then recently Peacock announced they're going to do a reunion of some sorts of The Office. So I'm excited. More, please. Oh, and my new favorite character. He wasn't before. I don't know how he wasn't before, but my new favorite character is definitely Creed. I'm obsessed. He's all over this book and he's such a nice guy. Such a nice guy. I rewatched some of The Office after I read this book, and I was laughing my face off every time Creed was on screen. The last one in nonfiction category is Strange Planet by Nathan W. Pyle? I don't know. This is a graphic novel, comic book. I don't know what that falls under. I think comic book. This is great. This is basically like, it's making fun of the human idiosyncrasies by taking the perspective of aliens or like casting us as aliens. So if human beings were aliens and were being observed by another alien form, how would it be? This is that. I feel like I'm really butchering the explanation. It's small, it's really funny, it really pokes fun at some of the really stupid, strange things we do. And some of it is really heartwarming too. So it was a really cool book and I was really surprised by it. I think this won the Goodreads humor category for 2020. So, and it deserved it as far as I'm concerned. And Office was in that category and this still deserved it. So check it out. Let's do poetry quickly before we get to fiction. Okay, so I've read 3. I'm actually reading through another poetry book right now that was released in 2020, but I haven't finished it, so I'm not going to review it. So 3, I have Dandelion by Gabbie, Hanna. I knew nothing about this. This was a random impulse buy at a bookstore. It's not that great. I think she's young. She does the illustrations as well as the poetry, and it's okay. If you're a teenager, this might be more in your vein and more relatable to you. There were some poems that were pretty decent, but like of 170 or 180 poems, if only like 5 or 10 piqued my interest, that's not a great average. That's not a great average. I think there's potential, but this isn't that great. Next is Homebody by Rupi Kaur. This is the third collection of poems that Rupi Kaur released. I actually enjoyed it, just as her other books. It helps that she's of South Asian descent. I really relate to her stories and her background and her ancestry and how she talks about feminism or trauma or sexual assault or all of these complicated intersectionalities of being a brown woman. It's great. She's also Sikh. She does do a few poems about farmers and Punjabis and that heritage. So if that's something you're interested in, and that's been on a lot of people's mind lately because of the farmer protest in Delhi, largely led by Punjabi farmers. So and she pays homage to it. So if you're interested, read for that reason also. Lastly, Dearly by Margaret Atwood. This was really good. I really had to take my time reading this book because some of the poems, I felt like I was back in my AP Lit class, just with my pencil going over like some of the words and be like, what does this mean? What does this mean? So, she's good. This is not my first book of poems by Margaret Atwood, so I knew her writing style, and this was good. This was really, really good. This also won the Goodreads award, and yeah, definitely deserved it. Good. Let's start with romance and fiction. Okay, I have 2 books with me here, and 2 of my books have been lent out to other people, so I'll just put that picture up here or something. So the first one is Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is part of a trilogy, though you don't have to read the first book to read this book. There's 3 sisters. So the first book is Chloe Brown's story, the first sisters, and the second book is Dani Brown's, and the third book is going to be Eve Brown's. So you don't have to read all of them. It's like the Bridgerton series where each sibling gets their own book to shine in. This is Dani Brown's story, and I loved it because the male protagonist, Zafir Ansari, is a South Asian man, and oh, he's so complicated. Like I feel like Talia Hibbert really did her research. This is set in UK, so I really thought she got the details of the immigrant experience of men struggling, especially men or South Asian descent, struggling to be in touch with their emotions and balance the stereotypes of the expectations of masculinity with their experiences, their trauma, their emotions. So it was good in that aspect. This was representation I really, really did not expect at all. I adored Zafir Ansari's character, which is why I gave this book 5 stars, I think. So I enjoyed it for that aspect, but it's still a really cute love story. Like Talia Hibbert does a decent job with romance, so check it out. Next, The Beach Read by Emily Henry. This book was really unexpected. Firstly, because I did not like it in the beginning. For almost 1/3 of the book, I was convinced I was going to give it 1 star and probably even do a rant video of how ridiculous it was. And then it kind of went 360, like to the point like the first 1/3 might even be justified for me. I really liked it. It very subtly went against the conventional structure of a romantic comedy. We from the beginning know what the problems are for both of them. And I really appreciated that the conflicts are sprinkled in and not like one huge fight at the very end. All the conflicts that come up are sprinkled in and dealt with like they would be in a real relationship where, you don't have like one major fight before you like ultimately get together. You have like little things, then you work it out, then another thing, then you work it out. In that sense, it was really good. So 2 more that I don't have with me are Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. Tweet Cute is about 2 teenagers in high school whose parents have rivaling food chains, or like one has a deli, like a deli is like a cafe kind of thing in New York, and the other one has a massive food chain. And both the teenagers take over the social media platforms for the parents' companies, and then they end up in a Twitter war. At the same time, they're in the same school, so it's pretty cute. I actually really enjoy this book because both our protagonists are not kept apart from each other just for the sake of building tension. There's valid reasons for why things are complicated for them. There's valid reasons for the tension and the conflict. Surprisingly, it packs a lot in. And yeah, really, it was really cute romance. I think this would be a good book to adapt into a movie. Like Netflix, get on this. And the last one is Two Lives of Lydia Bird by Josie Silver. I've already reviewed this book in a previous video. This also deals with the death of the main protagonist in this book. I forgot her name. Her fiance dies, and then she's dealing with that grief and moving on. I think I've compared this book to P.S. I Love You. It's very similar to P.S. I Love You, but slightly better. And I stand by that. So if you like P.S. I Love You, this is probably a good book for you to read. It was fine. It was a solid 3, I think, for me. So it was fine. Okay, next let's get into detective fiction, thriller, horror genre. I read 3 books that were published in 2020 in this genre. Okay, the first one is One Arranged Murder by Chetan, Bhagat. I hated this book. I did a whole rant video about this book. It's garbage. Don't read it. Please stop writing. Yes. I'll put a link to the video if you really want to hear me talk about this. The other 2 are The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This was really fun. This is both a whodunit and who's dead. You don't find out till pretty late in the book who's the person that's dead, and then later you'll find out who did it. So the whole time you're guessing, like there's so the setup of the thing is there's a remote island where 2 people who are really famous are getting married, and it's a very secluded wedding. They invite people, all their close friends, and they have interpersonal conflicts and issues in all their relationships, and things slowly bubble up, come to light, the tension builds. And so it's like over a weekend, so it's a span of 48 hours. So it goes back and forth between the incident, like, when the murder has happened and everyone's panicking, and back over the earlier 48 hours, recapping certain moments. And you get little tidbits and clues. And it wraps up very well. I kind of saw a lot of it coming, but I still really enjoyed it. It wraps up too neatly for my taste. There's way too many things that come together. I'm like, this is way too many coincidences, and it's a little too neat, but still fun. I will excuse it. It was well done and it was fun. And it kind of does it have a message? I don't think it really has a message. It's a good revenge come-up-in story, so check it out. One of Us is Next by Karen McManus. This is a sequel, though I don't think you need to have read the prequel to have read this book. So One of Us is Lying is the first book in the series, and this is an immediate sequel, though the author has published other books in the same universe. In the sense of the timeline, I think this is the book that comes right after One of Us is Lying. So unlike One of Us is Lying, which like immediately has a murder and 4 suspects, and like we're going through, this one also has a murder to start out with, but we don't find out who's the person that died till much later in the book, just like the guest list. So you're both trying to figure out who's the person that died and who's the one who did it. So actually, it's very similar to guest list, where you're getting little bits of information as you go along. My only issue with this book is it was very similar to One of Us Lying. By the end, you find out some of the motives that drove the murder were very similar to the first book. And I'm like, which was unnecessary. You could have easily picked another motive. So my issue was that if you haven't read the first book, and if you only have time to read one of the books, read the first one. Don't bother with this. But if you enjoyed that, this is still fine and fun. If you read the first book and you liked Bronwyn and Nate like I did, and if you want to find out what happened to them, go ahead, read this. Because secondary characters, background characters in this book, but you still find out what happened with their romance. This book and the previous book are very similar to Pretty Little Liars, but better if you ask me. And Riverdale fans also will like it. Okay, so that was my horror thriller section. Now we're getting into deep fiction. I have 5 more to go through. We can do this, guys. Clap When You Land is by Elizabeth Acevedo. This book is written in poetry, or like slam poetry. It feels like slam poetry, like it could be performed on stage. I want to watch someone perform this on stage. It feels like that, and it's really, really good. And you should listen to the audiobook performance of this. pretty good. I was going back and forth. I was reading and then listening, reading and then listening. It was really good. So it's about two people, these two. They both have Dominican Republic heritage and have one of them lives in New York, the other one lives in Dominican Republic. They both lose someone they loved in the same plane crash, and their lives intersect and all of that. And I really liked it. It's a very beautiful poem. It gets into the immigrant experience and the struggles of growing up and dealing with such a traumatic experience. So I've never read anything like this before. I've never read any of her work before. So I'm down for this. I'm really down for this. I'm going to check out more of her stuff. Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This is a debut novel, and I'm amazed that this is a debut novel because, damn, this is like if a whole book exploring the Karens of the world. The main protagonist is an African American young adult, not young adult. She's like in her 20s, but still trying to figure out what to do with her life. I feel like 20s is like still should be considered young adult. You're not completely have your shit together. So, and she ends up dating this guy who seems to have a fetish for black people. She's babysitting for this really wealthy liberal white woman who's like, if it's performative feminism or performative liberalism or leftism, but she does some problematic things, but she gets away with it. And it's a lot of commentary, but not dark. It's fun, it's light, and everyone's stories start falling apart. No one's one-sided. I actually even had problems with the main protagonist of the story, where I think the book intended for her to be like blameless and like bad shit was being done to her, but I feel like there was some stuff with her too that I disagreed with. It starts out with like one of those events like black people get assaulted or accosted by white people for doing normal things. You'd be walking your dog or like buying something or not driving a nice car, and someone would be like, are you sure this is your car, or are you sure this is your kid, or something like that. So it starts out with one of those events and kind of breaks down the small racial microaggressions and the problematic things in our society. And it's great. It's really cool. American Dirt is by Janine Cummins. This is set in Mexico. Is it Mexico, darling? Mexico. This is set in Mexico. The book starts out with a bang where the main protagonist, Lydia, and her entire family are having a barbecue, and her entire family, except for her 8-year-old son, are massacred. I think there's like 17 or 18 people that are murdered. And it's done by a kingpin, drug lord, whatever you want to call it. She's basically on the run, and he's a very powerful kingpin. She doesn't even have a second to deal with the grief. She's immediately on the run because she has to save her 8-year-old son. And like as she's running and she's figuring out how to get out of there, there's commentary about crime in Mexico. There's also like her interpersonal relationship with the kingpin and why there's a conflict, but also like the immigrant experience. Why and how are people driven to cross the border illegally into the United States? What drives these people, and how incredibly tough and traumatizing that journey is for them. And people know that this is a very perilous journey, and they still take it because their circumstances are that bad. This book actually received criticism. Some people criticize Janine Cummins, saying you're not Mexican, so you don't really have the right to tell this story. I don't know what to say about that because I don't clearly know enough. In my experience, she did a decent job. It didn't feel like she was fetishizing it. I think she really tried to shine light on this. But if the point is that you rather more Latin American and Mexican people's books should be published, then I definitely agree. They should get to tell their own story. But that doesn't change the fact that this is pretty well told. So I really enjoyed it. Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart. This was also a debut novel, and it won a Booker Prize. How does one do that? How does one like win the Booker Prize with their first book? The main protagonist is supposed to be the little kid, but it's mostly his mother's story. She's an alcoholic. So Shuggie is growing up with an alcoholic mother, abandoned by his father. He has this half sister and half brother, who are much older than him. set in Ireland during the financial crisis, and it's so atmospheric. You feel like you are actually living in Dublin in some of these neighborhoods. No character is completely villainous, and some of these people do terrible things, and you still understand the logic behind their actions. And it deep dives into alcoholism and how it's this magnificent beast to beat. But also, alcoholism was very common at one point. When gin was a thing, it was cheaper for a lot of his history and safer to drink alcohol because water could not be trusted, sanitization and all of that. People used to drink ale and gin like it was nothing. This is like, I think, around the time where alcoholism was starting to be considered a problem, a mental illness. So yeah, how it wrecks a life, that, but also, wow. Good job, Douglas Stewart. Last one is City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. I liked this book. I actually want to be the main protagonist of this book in my old age. Okay, in the summer of 1940, Vivian Morris goes to New York because she's not quite sure what to do with her life. She's very confused, but she's a talented seamstress kind of thing. She's rich. She comes from a very wealthy family, which is why she's the choice of like figuring her life out in the 1940s. Not a lot of people had that choice. So she goes there, she falls in with the theater troupe because her aunt is into theater. And then she makes a lot of mistakes, but I don't think she considers them mistakes. It formed a huge foundation in her life. I like the take it has on love. This is a really beautiful love story, but not quite the way you think a love story should function. It's really heartwarming. It's like more about friendship, and there's never anything physical, but it's not necessarily sad. This is happening with wars going on in the background. World War II, for instance, but also eventually the other wars. And homosexuality is weaved into it. There's other aspects, PTSD from war. And she ends up living in New York and growing old in New York. And as I said, I want to be her when I grow up, that confident, self-assured person who's just living her life in New York in a little apartment. And that sounds very quaint. Okay, that was an overview. Those are the 22 books that were published in 2020, that I read in 2020, and hope that helped. I'll do a part 2 of this video when I eventually get through all the other books published in 2020 that I want to get to. But for now, adios. I'm gonna be more vigilant and thorough about making videos and publishing them. Thank you for watching my video. Please like, subscribe, leave me a comment. Tell me what you want, what you don't like, what else do you want me to review, etc., etc. My Goodreads is linked down there. Okay, bye.